Well, good evening, everyone. It's Tom Padula from Tom Padula TV, and this is going to be the fourth, 1 hour dedicated to history. And I think I've worked out what I want to do with the 1 hour, which is, of course, talk about history initially, and then about half an hour later, I'll dedicate about a quarter of an hour or a little bit of time to Australia. I want to do something about Australia in the program, and also Italian songs, the lyrics, because a lot of people of Italian background, and of course I am a teacher of Italian, French and history. I want to bring the three elements of my expertise onto the screen for your enjoyment and for my benefit too, because I haven't done this sort of work for quite a while, and I am very happy to be doing it because I think there is room to look at world history and to look at what we can do to improve ourselves in the sense socially, in the sense of trying to avoid wars in the world. There's a lot of good things that are happening in the world now, and this pandemic that we are experiencing, even though it's very harsh, it has brought home a lot of considerations, and they will become obvious to us as time goes on. Now, this evening, in this hour, I'll be speaking about the Neolithic men. We spoke about the Paleolithic before, and also talked about that men and women, of course, came through, in a scientific explanation. They appeared about 1 million years ago on Earth, and it took them a long, long time to get upright, Homo erectus, and then from there, another 500,000 years, and they became sort of the Stone Age, the old Stone Age people, and then the new Stone Age people came a lot further on. And I haven't brought in geography here, but geography is important because it tells us that the Earth, as we know it, didn't have 5 continents. It had supercontinents before. Therefore, the Earth itself reshaped. When the big ice age came, and it sort of got rid of a lot of the big animals, and men somehow survived. So men who was so weak when he first lived amongst the big animals, and he was hunted. He became the hunter. He survived the ice age, and as a result of that, then because of the use of the hands, the discovering of fire, the stone implements, the wooden implements, then stone implements, and of course I haven't spoken about the iron because that's happened a lot later, but our civilization actually starts about 10,000-12,000 years ago. It's not very long at all in comparison to the beginning of the Earth, because Earth, for some people say 5 million years ago. That's a hell of a long time. So we're really in the last chapter of the planet's evolution, and that's important. Now, in terms of the Australian history, it's important because our indigenous people are regarded as Neolithic people. They didn't do a lot of discoveries that others in other parts of the world, in Europe, in China, in South America, had. The one thing that the Aborigines famous for is the boomerang. I think that's, it's a good tool anyway. It's a wonderful tool. Now we're getting there. To the hour, and I'm going to talk about the Neolithic people, the first Stone Age people, and then from then on, we're really going to get into the history part now. Taking a while to get going, but once we get going, because I want to bring in world history, I want to compare what happens in one area of the world to another. And on that note, let's start. Now, when we look at the time frame of men on Earth, really, if you think of 100, we are in the last 1%. So men took 1 million years to learn the most basic things that we are still using today, fire, tools, etc. But soon after, when when the old Stone Age people trained, towards the Neolithic era, trained a dog to help him or her chasing other animals, and domesticated the dog, became, men's best friend, really and truly. A dog is men's best friend from early times. And what happened was that because men did that, then he thought, you know what, we could domesticate other animals. So that's the study of husbandry. And now we think about cattle, wild cattle. They became domesticated. Donkeys became domesticated. Sheep, goats, well, yes, and also fowls. Other animals. You can make a list of all the animals that are domesticated. That was an important development amongst all humans. I'm not talking about any one race here, because we talk about races as well, and we have to approach that very delicate subject because people look different, but their blood is the same. But anyway, that'll come later. Now, the other thing that really made men and women more civilized, if you like, is agriculture. Because as long as men was the wanderer, going from place to place, living under the stars, having the fire, but, going into caves, etc. The minute you settle down anywhere, you then are able to organise yourself. Because if you gather enough food during the day, and you've got enough for a couple of days, let's say 2 or 3 days, you then have time to think of other things, to make other inventions, to improve your lot. And that's what happened in early men. Again, these things here didn't happen overnight. It took a long, long time. We got our brilliant minds here right now amongst us. And we're not all brilliant, but, there are some who are brilliant in certain areas. They're not always brilliant in other areas when they are brilliant in one area. I mentioned before, somewhere in what I've said before, that men is a bit horizontal and vertical. The verticals go deeper and deeper, and the horizontal go across from one thing to another, like butterflies. Now, those two things, husbandry and then agriculture, in other words, when men settled down and began to build the first few huts in order to be in one place for a longer period of time. We have I've got always my computer, but I don't need the computer for the moment, so I'm just going to let it go, and then I might ask you to be patient with me for a minute or so. Anyway, going back to these two things, husbandry and agriculture. Think about those two elements there. These are the two things that helped men actually become more civilized. And what do? They, as I said, I mentioned the animals, I mentioned, they started to grow plants, and they also began to build for themselves places where they could settle, like a little village, and their numbers grew as well. So once your numbers grow, what happens to all of us? We need to have leaders, and the leaders then lead the particular group. So it's a tribal factor. So these are important. Now, let's not forget that they're still using, rudimentary tools. They're still, the wheat, the wild wheat, the millet, the barley, are used to make dough, rough bread, etc. If you live near the coastal towns, you go fishing but if you live inland, you have to go for animals, you have to hunt them. And what I read about the Aborigines as well, the indigenous people of Australia and other places, that you don't always come back with a dead animal to eat at night. So a lot of the work was left to the women. Now, there is no study to say men and women are equal. They are, but they have different functions. So in early men, the functions are different, the two. But that's not always true, because when we go further into history, there are certain groups that are led by women. So in today's world, we're trying to equalise the sexes, if you like, for our own purposes, because, if everyone works, everyone contributes. If somebody is not working, it sort of, depends on others, and it's different. So that's where we're at. So let me read you something here. Everything else that he knows today, he has learned in the last moment of his existence. We're talking about men in the last 10,000 years, comparatively speaking. That is, the last 10,000 years or so. What caused this sudden speeding up of men's journey into knowledge? Well, two words give the answer: husbandry and agriculture. So that's really the most important thing. And so these two things we have to keep in mind. So keep in mind those two things: the domestication of animals and agriculture. And so that's important. Now, near the end of the Paleolithic period, men had tamed and bred some kinds of wild dogs to help him in hunting other animals for food. And he had learned to collect the seeds of certain wild grasses, to pound them up into a rough flour between two stones, and to cook this flour into a kind of damp or bread. Okay, so that's what I've been talking about. It's, don't forget, there are books about history that you can, you can purchase. And if you're interested, get into the historical thing. It's good, especially the early part. And there are beautiful documentaries as well. So about 10,000 years ago, the men of the Neolithic or New Stone Age somehow thought of planting the seeds, wild wheat, barley and millet, instead of merely collecting them from wild plants. At about the same time, they began to capture and tame wild cattle. So that's where we're at now. Okay? Now, what happens now if you work the land? You can do it with your hands, but really, it's better if you have some tools. So, ground stone implements. And they learn too how to make greatly improved stone implements by polishing or grinding them against other rocks instead of merely chipping or flaking them as their ancestors had done for hundreds of thousands of years. So progress, once you start progress, it sort of builds. It's like our economy. Once you start, then you get there more quickly as time goes on, including me right now, because I'm learning how to handle right now this particular hour. So what do I do? I mean, you can't talk for an hour without some sort of help. So that's what I'm getting now. And because I have Insania.com, that helps me. I'm surrounded by books every day. So, being surrounded by if you're on the computer all the time and you only do one thing. But if you use the computer wisely and you go across, you can learn about a lot of different areas of men's knowledge. And don't forget, knowledge is power. And also it helps you remain upbeat. Because, then you're not talking about other people. You're actually doing something really worthwhile for yourself. You're developing your mind and your knowledge. Okay. Now, let's have a look at this. So what are the marks of the of this Neolithic people? So how do we know about this? Excavations show that these discoveries were almost certainly made somewhere in the part of the world we call the Middle East, the area where Europe and Asia and Africa meet around the eastern end of the Mediterranean Sea. Stone sickles for harvesting grain have been found in excavated Neolithic villages which flourished in Syria as long as 6,000 or 7,000 BC. So now you're hitting the $10,000 mark, 10,000 years ago. And, some of the books talk about the Middle East, Sumer, Syria, the area there. That's where these excavations were found. But then there are also excavations in France, there are excavations in South America, there are excavations in China, there are excavations in North Africa, in America, in Africa. So what's happening today is that all nations are in a race, not just for the moon and for the planets. They're in a race to find their own identity way back, because you can then attract tourists and you can share your knowledge. It's a lot being discovered right now, and I don't know all of it, of course, but because of this hour, I'm hoping that you can then also contribute to this program, maybe. I don't know. You can, email me something that you do or that you found, and tompadula.tv@gmail.com. I'll receive your contribution and I might read it. In other words, I don't just want to be here talking all the time. If you yourself are interested in history, we can share some knowledge, whatever you have, as long as it's a bit, initially it's short, and then I'll have a look at it. And it'd be a great way of continuing our study of history, because, at the beginning it's easy, but as you move on, we'll move on from one civilization to another. But what is civilization? Because some people mistake progress sometimes for being civil. It's not always the case. So there are lots of civilizations, lots of different types of civilizations, depending on your, how you identify each one. So let's have a look at this. Now, these discoveries, we're talking about the sequel, this were actually found by archaeologists, and there is evidence of this in the museums across the world. So these discoveries had revolutionised results. That is, they caused a complete change in the way of life of those people who benefited by them. Men became food producers instead of food gatherers. That is not always true for all groups. That's why one group sometimes overcomes the other. And in our own lifetime, people who have knowledge, they acquire more power. They look like us, but in reality, some people have a greater impact on our social life than others. But we can all contribute. So it depends on how you go about acquiring the knowledge and putting it into practice. So when these Neolithic people became food producers, things started to change. Not only this, but there was much more food was created. For the first time, it was possible for a tribe or group of men to produce more food than was actually necessary to keep the group alive. Wow. And this meant that some time at least could be spared from the business of food getting. What happens during the spare time? Well, during the spare time, men had a chance to make new inventions and discoveries that their new way of life made desirable. We have seen that because he was a food gatherer, Paleolithic men could never settle down for more than a few days or weeks in one spot. What a difference it makes when you settle down somewhere. That must explain my love of being in one place. I've been in one house all along, since 77. whereas I've seen some people who have changed 10 houses. And they go from smaller to bigger, to bigger, to bigger, to bigger, and then they get to smaller and smaller. So in other words, they keep on, they love the change. They love doing something. And that's what happened with Neolithic man. He decided, I'm not going to go anywhere now. I'm going to settle down because it's easier. I can grow my vegetables. Because when you're a food gatherer, you have to go in wide areas and sometimes you don't find anything. So if you are self-sufficient, you can be self-sufficient. And that makes us think about today. In politically speaking, we've been selling a lot of our minerals overseas, our food, etc., and then, we also import a lot of what other people make. Now, as long as there is peace on earth, etc., we can deal with globalization in an appropriate way. But the minute one group of people, one nation starts holding back the buying, what's been going on for a while, then the other party is in trouble. And so that's when you then think, okay, now if they do that to us, we then have to find other ways to survive. And, we lost a lot of manufacturing in this country, in Australia, because of the small population, etc. So, but these elements here, this thinking, these reflections, can come from history. You can't just listen to. If you study history properly, you see that there's a cycle in things, and things tend to repeat themselves. Now let's go back. So men and women started to make permanent camps. So man remained a camper for 1 million years, not one day, as the Stone Age Aborigines of Australia. Well, Stone Age Aborigines, that's a part of the Paleolithic men, because Australia was settled around 60,000 years ago. So that's what we know from the finds that we've had up to now, maybe even longer. But the Ice Age was between 60,000 years to about 20,000 years, the Big Cold. And when there was the Ice Age, let's not forget there were the supercontinents. The supercontinents mean that Australia was connected, say, to Bali, to Sumatra, to Southeast Asia, so people could come across. So the Ice Age, because of the ease of movement from one place to another, with great sacrifices, but because of the ease of movement, then certain people settled in certain parts of the world. So that's how you can explain why the Incas, the Aztecs, the Maya in South America, why a lot of the the indigenous people of North America were there, why there are a lot of people in Asia, in Russia, let's say, in Africa, in the islands. Things just don't happen overnight. But when they do happen and people settle down, then if they remain there for a long time, take New Zealand, the Maoris, they've been there for centuries. So when you get invaded, but don't forget, in ancient Rome started with Romulus, and Remus, sort of were creating just one line in the sand in the earth and said, this is where we're going to build a city. And it's still there. And because they needed women, so they went and raided the neighbours. So violence across the board. Don't worry about invasion. We're going to get invaded anyway, maybe from outer space, and we've got to learn to live with them. Who knows? Who knows? So, but if the tribe plants a crop, it must remain on the spot to weed it, to protect it from grazing animals, and to harvest the ripe grain at the end of the season. And if he must remain at one place for a year or more, man will think it worthwhile to make his camp more comfortable. Thus, farming life meant that men had the time and the desire to build houses. We have most of man's history is about farming, really, farming, subsistence living. That's how it is. Now, you want to build yourself a comfortable home. So at first, these houses were only crude huts made of interwoven branches plastered together with mud. But they were marvels of architecture compared with the windbreaks of the old Stone Age. So in the old Stone Age, just a few twigs, etc. Then as time went on, there you are. Men learned to build different huts, a bit better each time. Again, it's not done overnight, over decades, hundreds of years, whatever. But once they do it once, they can repeat it. Now, these huts, then, if you build one, you can build another one, and another one, and another one. So they become villages, Neolithic villages. And there are examples of Neolithic villages in all parts of the world, especially, I love, talking about South America, because it doesn't get much of a mention, and Africa too. You get, and Asia, Europe, North America, everywhere. You get different types of villages. Even today in Assam, in India, there are some primitive hill tribes, etc. This is one of the older, textbooks that I get. So I actually, a lot of it needs to be looked at, because some of the things that they say, they said 50, 60, 70 years ago, is very different from now. And people would get offended if Tom Padula, let's say, repeated exactly, what people said. I sort of clean it up a bit as I go along. But I also put my own reflections on all these things. So you have to accept that, and you don't have to accept it. In fact, if you don't accept it all the time and you do some of the research yourself, you'll find a lot of the things that I say needs a bit of clarification. But you can't do it in an hour. This is done for yourself. And then if you really want to put a stamp on it, then you can go live too. Easy. Okay. So, but as time went on, the New Stone Age villages became larger and houses better. Some men, freed from the task of food getting, began to become specialists. There you are. What's the definition of a specialist? More and more about less and less. All right, Neolithic miners and carpenters. Here we go, the first ones. And they mention in England, but the reality is also, in Italy and other parts as well. But, it depends on who writes the textbook. You talk about your own areas, of course. So Neolithic mine driven far into the hillside in search of the hardest and best pieces of flint. Over 80 deer horn picks used once by the ancient miners have been found. So when you start digging, you also find that sometimes things have been covered for a long time, and you get the original tools, which is good. In Italy, the Etruscans, I talk about the Italians, see? But if I was born in England, I would talk about in England. So if you're in France, you talk about France. So there is always that little bias. You have to accept it. It's part of who we are. So if you live in Werribee, look after Werribee. But if you live in, in Brunswick, so local is always good in politics and sport, because they're people around you and you have to live with them and you have to play with them. So, it's always worthwhile. Some of my young students, one or two of them especially, they said, you live in Australia, but I barrack for, the country of my parents. But you're from here. I said, I migrated here too, and I understand. I've always barracked for Australia against Italy. Sorry to say, if Italy and Australia, because of the local, but I love Italy to be, when they're not fighting Australia, to win. So you also got your preferences as well. And that's part of history as well. It's an important consideration when you look at history and how it's done. So Other men became carpenters, working with the new, surprisingly efficient groundstone tools. Even saws made of flint and wood have been found. In an experiment carried out in Denmark, a modern workman equipped with a set of Neolithic tools was able in one 10-hour day to cut down a hew into logs 26 pine trees of an average thickness of 8 inches. So some people now, some of the researchers, some people will say, what could they build in this time? Well, you can see that, in that particular example, you've got an example of someone who can do things with the old tools. You don't always need new tools. You can use the old tools to make things. So, discovery of pottery. Other specialists were potters and weavers. Pottery making and spinning and weaving clothes were two of the most important discoveries that the more settled conditions of the Neolithic period made possible. Some tribes late in the Old Stone Age had discovered how to spin human and animal hair into string. So you can make clothes. So, again, from the animal skins into clothes. Wow. And weaving. New Stone Age men discovered how to use the fibres of the flax plant for this purpose, and further how to weave the thread into cloth. By the end of the New Stone Age, about 4000 BC, cloth had begun to replace skins as clothing in the most advanced part of the world. And pottery vessels made of baked clay were in common use for storing food and drink. So there you are. We are now at a stage where in some parts of the world, it's not true that progress is made in one area and spreads across like wildfire. Soon after, some people then say, well, that's the advantage. So if you don't share your knowledge, then let's say that knowledge there doesn't get passed on. So it's important to share knowledge. But some people say, well, if I don't tell them, then I've got the advantage. You can see. And that's an important consideration. So if you're a bit of a specialist, you become, you try to protect your areas of specialisation because the others don't know. And if you have to explain everything to them, then somebody will take it on, and then etc., etc. And we're having this discussion about the pandemic, the vaccines, etc. We've had vaccines all along. They've been huge discoveries, but before, and politically too, we've had different types of governments. We've had monarchies and dictators and communist rulers, you name it, all different types, and the discoveries were made somewhere else. Now, because of what's happening now with our technology, etc., the knowledge gets shared a lot faster and progress is made very quickly. But you still want to protect your discovery. Because, if you invent something and you patent it, let's face it, you then can make a lot. But in my case, I always done it for free. And this lessons here, too, are for free. Why not? I mean, at the end of the day, once you can eat at the end of, once you can survive quite well, you've done your duty, you get a certain time in your life, you don't need much, really, honestly. Just enjoy life and try to pass on the best part of our humanity, really. That's important. And for me, that's probably the main thing. So, share my work here because, honestly, it's a positive contribution. I don't want to be negative in any way, and if I do, forgive me. But I've always been positive in my outlook in the hardest possible times too. But that's how it is, and that's what happened with the Neolithic men. They get to a certain stage, they make advances, they get more organised, and then the villages become cities, and we're going to get to that. So it is important to remember that when we say, for example, that the Neolithic age ended about 4000 BC, we mean that it ended then in the most advanced part of the world, in this case in the in this Mediterranean area. Now, can I say this? I'll be speaking about the Peking man, and in this particular book it says that's where it happened in Europe, but other people can claim the same sort of thing because they make their own discoveries. But if you don't have the right book for it, and if you have, it depends. When you wrote the book, what was important to you at the time, you go according to your times, and it depends on where you are, and etc. etc. Now, some of the Neolithic examples that I was talking about, the villages, etc. It's the most advanced. The advanced parts in a world history is the ones who achieve the greatest inventions and put them to good use. But that doesn't mean that everyone does it. So in parts of the world where there was no writing, so in our Indigenous Australian communities, there is no writing. There are paintings still. There are tools that you discover. You can do carbon dating on them, but really you don't have written form. The earliest part, even some of the languages, occurred when, I've read somewhere, again, this is from memory, I'd have to check it, when German migrants came to Western Australia or in other parts of Australia, they began to quantify, some people began to write down Aboriginal, particular languages, of the dialects spoken here. It's not dialects, they're proper local languages. But if you don't write them down, if you don't have an alphabet, if you don't have some signs where you write it, you don't have the everyday history that we are so used to today with all our newspapers, magazines, and also the media now. So the visual world is overcoming, but even with computers, you have to, you have to learn to write. But now, even for example, languages, and on languages, can I say this? I have a class on Tuesdays between 11:30 and 12:30, where I am teaching Italian. But how am I doing it? It's like a journey. I haven't done it for quite a while, and I thought, you know what, Tom, it's better to give something. So I've started right at the beginning. I've done the first lesson on last Tuesday. You can look it up on my Facebook page, and it'll eventually be on insegna.com blog. But if you want to follow, a bit of, if you've done Italian and you know it quite well, it's still applicable, because the way I will do it is I will leave it up to you to revise what you already know and to progress in what you don't know, because you always learn from what you don't know, not from what you know. So I will present certain things like today. Now, I'm just looking at the time, it's 8:03. And I've spoken about the New Stone Age. Now, I think we've gone to the villages of Neolithic men. I'm going to leave it there for tonight, because otherwise I won't be able to do my other stuff. And give me a minute or so. You can have a drink as well. I want to speak about Australia, and the first thing that I want to do is my poetry. But before I'll keep on talking to you, because I have to get back to my computer, and it'll be lovely to have it going again, so that I can. Yeah, here we are. So that I can then go to the music as well. So here we go. Okay. There we go. Are we here? Are we not here? Whatever. But anyway, I'll wait for it to come on. I want to read you two poems that I've written. One is called Australia. Actually, I'll read three of them. One is called Australia, and I wrote this in 2009, well, way before 2009. It's in this booklet here. If you ever come to Insegna, I'll give you one. Why not? Okay, Australia. And I'll do this in English, maybe also in Italian. It would be nice. But anyway, in English first. You are so far, well, Australia, dry land, serene in your desert with life which pulsates only at the shouts of the ancient Aborigines, true Australians, wise of the land which owned them. Civilization takes its definition from the environment, from the colour of the flowers, from the warmth of the days, which change only to go dreaming in the extended plains, lacking in trees and water. So those are the difficulties of living in the middle of Australia, because in the northern part you get a lot of water, in the tropical land, and in southern part you get the cold as well. So the environments in Australia are very different. Now, the other thing about Australia, and this probably applies to you too, this one is called absorbed. You are so far away there, in that town lost in the plains, where the dust dries up the lips, where the beer satisfies the throat burnt by the heat. Whilst you drink, you tell me, I have need of peace, and you add, I need solitude. Well, Australia is a land which absorbs you in its roots without you realising it, I point out aloud. Yes, it is really true, he reflects, whilst his glance takes him somewhere else, where, sure of itself, nature reigns over everything else. So a bit of, this is my first couple of poems on Australia. Should write more. Now, I did give you in the Lake Munga region last week, and they are, of course, in both languages, and they are in my, poetry books. There's another one that I saw here, I Dream. Now, this was 2009, and it's about Australia from a multicultural point of view. I dream of a united Australia where all its people can be what they want to be, without the prejudice of poverty, of ignorance, of a lack of opportunity. I dream of Australians who respect the environment, their living conditions, their social infrastructures, the private and public property. We talk of love and respect, of hope and honesty, of equality. But how can that be if a few spoil it for the many, and if a few determine harsher laws and penalties? Let there be more tolerance where this is just and fair. Let there be more intolerance towards those who evil pray. Should my dream become a reality, then there would be a just community where the young, adult and mature respect each other's propensities, where all survive and love until, who knows, they fade into eternity. And my computer here is causing me trouble, and I have to do something. Oh my God. Well, anyway, the thing is about Australia too, is that we are, where are we? We are here. Okay, let's see what I can do now. There's one good thing though. Once it happens, then we're off and running again. Yes. But before I go into the last bit, I might just do the songs when they come up, because otherwise I will, I want to try something different. I read you about Australia. I wanted to do something on the early part of, before the dream time and before the invasion. Okay, so I'll do that right at the end. I've got some time, but this time here, what I want you to do is, have a look at this. Now, Signora Fortuna, there are 4 songs that I'm going to do, and this is one of them. Signora Fortuna. It's a beautiful song, and I went to the trouble of singing it today. And on Tuesdays, during my Italian class, I'll use some of these songs for teaching Italian as well. So I won't go through them in detail with you, but I'll read them to you in my own sweet way. As part of my history presentation this evening, towards the end, I'm going to present the 4 songs. The first one is Signora Fortuna. Here we go. C'è una strada chiamata destino che porta in collina. C'è sul colle una casa argentata dal chiaro di luna. Chi va in cerca d'amore vi trova una fata divina, che è signora del bene e del male e si chiama Fortuna. Bella, le dissi in pianto, tu che fai tante grazie, una soltanto, dammi l'amore di una bimba bruna. Quella volta m'hai chiuso la porta, signora Fortuna, oh signora Fortuna. Ed avevo una bella casetta di sogni e d'amore, ed avevo un amore di bimba dagli occhi di mare, ma un'ondata di vento ha distrutto la casa e il mio cuore. T'ho pregato, signora Fortuna, davanti all'altare. Bella, se mi vuoi bene, falla tornar ch'io muoio dalle pene. Non ho più amore, non ho più nessuna. Ed ancora m'hai chiuso la porta, signora Fortuna, oh signora Fortuna. Ma stanotte guidato dal cuore e da un raggio di luna, ho ripreso la strada più antica che è sempre più buona. C'era un'ombra tremante, la chioma più bianca che bruna, e mi ha detto in un bacio, son mamma che mai t'abbandona. Mamma, Fortuna mia, questa è la miglior grazia che ci sia, perché di mamma ce n'è solo una. Questa volta puoi chiudere la porta, signora Fortuna, oh signora Fortuna. Well, the love of a mother carries you all your life and beyond. There you are, Signora Fortuna. Well, you can see that was Signora Fortuna. It's a lovely song, and I have it in my YouTube channel from the original, so with the actual words there, and you can actually learn it off, which is important. This one here is sung by, this one here is called E qui comando io, and here I command. And it's sung by Gigliola Cinquetti on YouTube again. But, I'm challenging myself. I think I have to stand up for this song here. Well, Gigliola Cinquetti sang it. This is a beautiful song for anyone to learn and to sing, also in groups. It's a good one. E qui comando io. Quelle stradelle che tu mi fai far, cara Rosina, quelle stradelle che tu mi fai far, cara Rosina, le devi pagar. E qui comando io, e questa è casa mia, ogni dì voglio sapere, e qui comando io, e questa è casa mia, ogni dì voglio sapere chi viene e chi va. Devi pagarle con sangue e dolor, finché la luna, devi pagarle con sangue e dolor, finché la luna non cambia i color. E qui comando io, e questa è casa mia, ogni dì voglio sapere, e qui comando io, e questa è casa mia, ogni dì voglio sapere chi viene e chi va. Quando la luna la cambia i color, vieni che l'ora, quando la luna la cambia i color, vieni che l'ora di fare l'amor. E qui comando io, e questa è casa mia, ogni dì voglio sapere, e qui comando io, e questa è casa mia, ogni dì voglio sapere chi viene e chi va. E qui comando io, e questa è casa mia, ogni dì voglio sapere, e qui comando io, e questa è casa mia, ogni dì voglio sapere chi viene e chi va. Well, this applies to to a lot of young people living in a house where the father and the mother, somebody says, "Qui comando io," you can't go out. You can, but without my permission, you've got to come at the right time. So, qui comando io. Enjoy.
Yeah, it's a lovely song, really and truly, and it's good with younger people because there can be discussions about it, and it's wonderful. The 4 songs, the idea is for me to present them and for you to then do further research and sing, hear them or listen to them from going to YouTube. And this one here is important. Vecchio Frac. Vecchio Frac is a Domenico Modugno song, a great Italian singer-songwriter, one of the first ones after the war. And, he really was a trailblazer, this one. And it's a pretty long one. It's not really, but here we go. Let's have a look.
Vecchio Frac is one of Domenico Modugno's songs. He was a great singer-songwriter, and this one is especially beautiful, in my opinion, because it tells a beautiful story. Vecchio Frac, here we go. È giunta mezzanotte, si spengono i rumori, si spegne anche l'insegna di quell'ultimo caffè. Le strade son deserte, deserte e silenziose, un'ultima carrozza cigolando se ne va. Il fiume scorre lento, frusciando sotto i ponti, la luna splende in cielo, dorme tutta la città. Solo va un vecchio frac, ha un cilindro per cappello, 2 diamanti per gemelli, un bastone di cristallo, la gardenia nell'occhiello, e sul candido gilet un papillon di seta blu. S'avvicina lentamente, con incedere elegante, ha l'aspetto trasognato, malinconico ed assente, non si sa da dove viene né dove va. Di chi sarà quel vecchio frac? Bonne nuit, bonne nuit, bonne nuit, bonne nuit, buonanotte, va dicendo ad ogni cosa, ai fanali illuminati, ad un gatto innamorato che randagio se ne va. È giunta ormai l'aurora, si spengono i fanali, si sveglia a poco tutta quanta la città. La luna s'è incantata, sorpresa impallidita, pian piano scolorandosi nel cielo sparirà. Sbadiglia una finestra sul fiume silenzioso e nella luce bianca galleggiando se ne van. Un cilindro, un fiore, un frac. Ha un cilindro per cappello, 2 diamanti per gemelli, un bastone di cristallo, la gardenia nell'occhiello e sul candido gilet un papillon di seta blu, galleggiando dolcemente e lasciandosi cullare, se ne scende lentamente sotto i ponti verso il mare se ne va. Di chi sarà, di chi sarà quel vecchio frac? Adieu, 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 vecchio mondo, ai ricordi del passato, ad un sogno mai sognato, ad un'apido da sposa, prima ed ultimo suo amor.
Well, the whistling part, that's a long song, but, it's a good one to study. And Domenico Modugno is a wonderful singer. You can really enjoy him. Now, this particular one is a more modern song, and it's a short one, so it won't be too long for you. Here we go. Settembre. Okay, this is from Peppino Gagliardi, not a well-known singer, but I've discovered these people lately because in my earlier days I did not have the time to to listen to anything. Okay, here we go. Settembre.
This song here is by Peppino Gagliardi, and it's one of the more modern songs of Italy, the last century, of course. It's sung by Peppino Gagliardi, and the name of it is Settembre. Fra qualche giorno finirà l'estate e sulla spiaggia niente resterà. Le ore passate saranno un ricordo che noi porteremo lontano, io e te. L'estate se ne andrà insieme al sole, l'amore se n'è andato già con lei. Le prime gocce baciano la sabbia e stanno già bagnando gli occhi miei. Settembre poi verrà, ma senza sole, e forse un altro amore nascerà. Settembre poi verrà, ma non ti troverà, e piangeranno solo gli occhi miei. Settembre poi verrà, ma non ti troverà, e piangeranno solo gli occhi miei. E piangeranno solo gli occhi miei. E piangeranno solo gli occhi miei.
Well, that's
You can
it.
see the song is very short. There's a lot of music, beautifully sung by Peppino Gagliardi with a big orchestra. When you try it yourself, what you can do is, when you're learning it, you learn as close as possible to the original. And of course, you're going to make mistakes. It's going to take a while. Then if you want to sing it in public, it's another story. You need to prepare well. Here we are. My interest in songs is on the lyrics. And I will use these songs here in my teaching of Italian on Tuesdays at 11:30 to 12:30. 11:30 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. They are free lessons, and each lesson will be very different, and you'll be able to access whatever I do on my Facebook page initially, and then it'll be in the insegna.com website. in the blog section. Okay, well, enough for one night. Thank you very much. Ciao.
Well, there's me still here because we've still got a few minutes. I just want to talk about Dante Alighieri. On Sunday, I'll be doing Canto 7 of Dante Alighieri, and it's an interesting one. Dante is coming up everywhere because of his 700 years, commemorating his death in Ravenna. So, if you come on the night, I would appreciate it. And I want to thank a few people who've come on, Ian Adams and Marisa, Grazie, Dominic. I really appreciate you coming on and listening to me, keeping me company. But I have to concentrate on what I do, and the rest will be. You don't have to listen to all of it, of course, but you can always come back and revise what I've said and check it out. The most important thing really is for you to take on the idea of history and the Italian songs. I wanted to finish with before the invasion with the Aborigines because that's what I said I was doing before. But really, if we reflect very well on before 1788, it was a different world, and it kept, in certain parts of Australia, it continued anyway. It wasn't all in one hit. Some of those divisions, if you like, there's been a lot of talk about Australia, but it's a big continent. So the invasion only occurred in small parts of the country, and it's been slowly happening ever since. And now we're finally getting everyone together. And I'm so happy to see that we made the Indigenous people are now taking it upon themselves to codify the languages of their forefathers, and making great progress in all areas of life. It's good. It's the same as with all other groups coming from overseas. There are challenges, undoubtedly, but at the end of the day, no use complaining too much. You can make changes within the framework of the laws of the land. You can't just roam around thinking it's not going to happen. Governments have got a way of convincing people to do the right thing, but they don't always win because they need our support in what they do. And power should be shared. So occasionally put them out to pasture and get someone else in, and you get the changes straight away. That's the difference. That's the beauty of democracy. It's an imperfect way of ruling the world, the country, if you like. Okay. Now, I don't have much time. I've only got a couple of minutes. So let me reflect on what I'm actually doing now. I've decided a few weeks ago, in mid-September, to join, this live situation here because it's an opportunity. I've had the programs on Channel 31 since April 2001, and before that I was filming and doing other things with Italian theatre groups whilst I was teaching. So I taught up to, including 2003 when I retired. So it was 30 years, a 30-year stint, and I'm so happy that Ian Adams has come on and watched me in action. Thank you very much, Ian. It's important because he was one of the people that chose me to become the Italian consultant for Victoria, and I think it was it went all right, and it's been a wonderful memory for me. And before that, I've been very lucky to meet so many beautiful people in my journey up to now. And there's Marisa there, one of my students. A few people, everyone. Dominic comes on through Stephen Ross Ferraro, the singer. It's sort of, it's a journey for everyone, really. So we've got their own history. Why don't you write yours? One page at a time. start from when you were born, and even before. Maybe that's really should be the best reflection for this history era. You write your own history. Because I've done a bit of it, I must admit, I've done a bit of it, and maybe one of these days I'll read you a few paragraphs. I've done it up to now. Now it's 8:30, and as I usually say, when it's 8:30, I do it on the hour, and that's it. Conquesto on this one. Thank you very much for watching. Facebook, don't forget. Ciao, Tom Padula and Tom Padula TV. Buonanotte.